My daughter gave my house to her in-laws to impress them. She stood in my living room in the home my late husband and I worked our entire lives for, and announced she was gifting it to them for their anniversary. She thought I was just a weak old woman she could push aside. So I showed up the next weekend with the police and the original deed that was still in my name, and I had them all thrown out as trespassers. Before I begin, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. My name is Patricia Mayfield, and for a long time I thought my greatest accomplishment was my home. This is the story of how my own daughter tried to take it from me, and how I had to remind her that a queen is never without power in her own castle. The silence in my house was a comfortable one. It was the silence of a life well lived, of a mortgage paid off, of a quiet, orderly retirement. At 69, I was the proud and sole owner of a beautiful brick home in Cascade Heights, a historic tree-lined neighborhood in Atlanta that was a testament to Black success and endurance. My late husband Robert and I had bought this house 40 years ago, a young couple with big dreams and a small down payment. We had poured our love, our sweat, and our savings into its walls. It was more than just a house. It was the story of our life together. As a retired high school principal, I was used to order and command. My life was my own, my days filled with gardening, my book club, and long, satisfying chats with my best friend and neighbor Brenda Cole. I was independent, I was secure, and I was at peace. My only child, Danielle, was a different story. At 42, Danielle was a woman who was perpetually running a race she could never win. She worked as an assistant to a high-end interior designer, a job that gave her a glimpse into a world of wealth and status that she desperately wanted to be a part of. She was married to a good, if somewhat passive, man named Kevin Turner, a mid-level manager at a tech company. Kevin's family, the Harrisons, were the source of Danielle's deepest insecurity. Dr. Reginald and Beatrice Harrison were old money, Buckhead royalty. They were doctors and lawyers, a family of quiet, unshakable prestige, and they had never, not for one moment, let my daughter forget that she had married into a world that was not her own. Danielle's attempts to impress them were a constant, exhausting performance. She spent money we didn't have on designer clothes, hosted dinner parties that were far too extravagant, and spoke of her in-laws with a mixture of reverence and terror. The Trojan horse arrived on a Sunday afternoon, disguised as an act of filial concern. Danielle and Kevin came over, their faces etched with a practiced, somber worry. "Mom," Danielle began, her voice a soft, gentle purr that always set my teeth on edge. "Kevin and I have been talking, and we're worried about you. All alone in this big house." "I'm not alone," I said, my voice crisp. "I have my friends, my garden. I'm perfectly fine." "But you're not getting any younger," she pressed, her voice dripping with a false sweetness. "What if you fell? Who would be here to help you? We think we should move in. Just to be here for you. To help with the upkeep, to make sure you're safe." I looked at my daughter, at the carefully constructed mask of concern on her face, and I knew, with a mother's intuition, that this was not about my well-being. It was about hers. It was about getting access to the one thing I had that she so desperately coveted. This house. A beautiful, paid-off home in a prestigious neighborhood. It was a status symbol she could use to finally impress the Harrisons. But I loved her. And a mother's love can be a blind, foolish thing. I saw the desperation in her eyes, the deep, gnawing insecurity that drove her, and I wanted to help. I wanted to give her the stability she craved. "All right," I said against my better judgment. "You can move in. For a while." They moved in the following month, and the atmosphere of my peaceful home changed overnight. My quiet sanctuary became their social stage. But the final, fateful step came a few weeks later. Danielle sat me down at my kitchen table, a stack of legal-looking documents in her hand. "Mom," she said, her voice all business now. "Since we're living here and since this house will be mine one day anyway, it just makes sense from a legal standpoint to put my name on the deed. It's called joint tenancy. It just makes the inheritance process seamless when the time comes. It's just a formality to avoid probate court." I hesitated. My best friend, Brenda, a retired court clerk with a bullshit detector that was second to none, had warned me against this very thing. "Don't you sign a single piece of paper, Patricia," she'd said. "That girl is up to something." But I looked at my daughter's eager, smiling face. I looked at my son-in-law, Kevin, who just nodded in his usual passive agreement. And I thought, she is my only child. This house will be hers one day. What harm could it do? So I signed. I went with her to a lawyer's office and I signed the paper that made her a joint tenant on the deed of my home. I thought I was performing a simple act of estate planning. I had no idea I was handing her the key to my front door, a key she would later use to try and lock me out of my own life. I had willingly pulled the Trojan horse inside the walls of my fortress, never imagining the army of betrayal that was hidden inside. The moment my signature was dry on that new deed, the shift in my own home was palpable. The daughter who had moved in under the guise of being my caretaker was gone, replaced by a woman who acted as if she were the lady of the manor, and I was the hired help. My quiet routines were steamrolled by her social calendar. My book club, which had met in my living room for 20 years, was suddenly an inconvenience. "Can't you all meet at Brenda's this month, Mother?" Danielle would ask, not looking up from her phone. "I'm having some of Kevin's colleagues over for cocktails, and I need the space to look sophisticated." She began to redecorate, replacing my comfortable, cherished furniture with cold, modern pieces that looked like they belonged in a magazine, not a home. My late husband's favorite armchair, the one with the worn spot on the arm where his hand always rested, disappeared one afternoon. When I asked where it was, Danielle just shrugged. It was old and drab. It didn't fit the new aesthetic. I donated it. She didn't ask. She just erased. Piece by piece, she was erasing my life, my history, and replacing it with her own aspirational, soulless version of what she thought a successful life should look like. Kevin, my son-in-law, just went along with it all, his standard response a weak, conflict-avoidant. "Whatever you think is best, honey." The pinnacle of her campaign to impress her in-laws, the grand, final assault, was planned for their 45th wedding anniversary. Danielle decided to host a lavish dinner party in their honor. For weeks, the house was in a state of chaos. Caterers, florists, and party planners traipsed through my home, with Danielle directing them like a frantic, insecure general. The night of the party, the house was unrecognizable. It was filled with strangers, all of them from the Harrisons' wealthy Buckhead world. They moved through my home with an air of bored entitlement, their conversations a low murmur of stock portfolios and European vacations. Dr. Reginald and Beatrice Harrison, the guests of honor, were exactly as I remembered them, cold, elegant, and masters of the backhanded compliment. "Danielle, darling, you've done wonders with this place," Beatrice said, her eyes sweeping over my living room with a faint, dismissive smile. "It's amazing what a little good taste can do for such a quaint old house." Reginald was even worse. He cornered me by the fireplace and began to pontificate about the changing demographics of my beloved Cascade Heights neighborhood. "It's a shame, really," he said, swirling the brandy in his snifter. "This area used to have such potential. Now it's just, well, it's not Buckhead, is it?" I just smiled, a tight, polite smile that I had perfected over years of being a high school principal, a smile that said, "I am listening, but I am also imagining you being slowly devoured by fire ants." The climax of the evening came after dinner. We were all gathered in the living room for a champagne toast. Danielle, her face flushed with a mixture of wine and nervous excitement, stood before the fireplace, a glass held high. "I'd like to make a toast," she began, her voice ringing with a false, theatrical emotion, "to the most wonderful, most inspiring in-laws a girl could ever ask for. Reginald and Beatrice, you have been a shining example of what a successful life and a successful marriage looks like. Kevin and I are so blessed to be a part of your family." She paused, beaming at the Harrisons, who accepted her praise with the smug, satisfied look of two cats who had just been handed a bowl of cream. "And so," Danielle continued, her voice rising with a dramatic crescendo, "to celebrate your 45 years together, Kevin and I wanted to give you a gift. Something that truly shows the depth of our love and admiration. So hard to buy a gift for people who have everything. So we decided to give you something that you can enjoy for years to come, a place to relax. An in-town pied a terra for when you don't feel like driving all the way back to Buckhead after a show." She took a deep breath, her eyes shining with a manic, desperate light. And then she delivered the line that would detonate my entire world. "We are gifting you this house." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by a single choked gasp which I realized a moment later had come from me. I stared at my daughter, my mind refusing to process the words she had just said. Gifting them my house. My home. The home my husband and I had poured our souls into. The Harrisons didn't look shocked. They didn't look confused. They looked pleased. Beatrice let out a small, delighted laugh. "Oh, Danielle, you shouldn't have," she said, but her tone made it clear she thought she absolutely should have. "It's the least we could do," Danielle said, basking in the glow of their approval. "We want you to have it. To make it your own." Reginald stood up and raised his glass. "Well," he said, his voice booming with a new proprietary air, "that is quite a gift. I must say the first thing we'll have to do is knock down that wall between the kitchen and the dining room. It will really open up the space." They were already renovating. They were standing in my living room, drinking my champagne and discussing the demolition of my home, a home that had just been gifted to them by a daughter who had absolutely no right to do so. I just stood there, frozen, invisible. I was a ghost at my own wake. My daughter hadn't just betrayed me. She had sold me, my home, my entire history for the cheap, fleeting approval of two people who despised us both. The outrageous gift had been given. And it seemed, was the price. The moment the last of the party guests had departed, their car doors closing with a series of soft, expensive thuds, the fragile dam of my self-control broke. I turned to my daughter, my body trembling with a rage so pure and so cold it felt like ice water in my veins. "What did you do?" I asked, my voice a low, dangerous whisper. Danielle, still flushed with the success of her evening, just waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, mother, don't be so dramatic. It was a gesture. Power move. That's how their world works. You have to think big." "Think big," I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts to control it. "You gave away my home. The house that your father and I worked our entire lives for. You stood there and gave it away like it was a party favor. It's my house too now, remember?" she said, her voice turning sharp and ugly. "My name is on the deed. And it's the best investment I could have made." Did you see their faces? They were finally impressed. They finally see me as one of them. They see you as a fool. I shot back. A desperate, foolish girl who would sell her own mother for a pat on the head. Kevin, who had been silently observing the confrontation, finally spoke up. "Now let's all just calm down," he said, his voice a weak, placating murmur. "Danielle, maybe you should have discussed it with your mom first." "Discussed what, Kevin?" she wheeled on him. "My mother is a retired old woman. She doesn't need a big house like this. She should be grateful that we're letting her stay here at all. The Harrisons are even talking about renovating a small room in the back for her. She'll be perfectly comfortable. A small room in the back. Like a servant. My own home." The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it stole the air from my lungs. I looked at my daughter, at this stranger with my blood in her veins, and I felt a profound, bottomless sense of loss. The girl I had raised was gone, replaced by this cold, calculating monster. The following weekend the Harrisons arrived not as guests but as new owners. They brought their architect with them, a man who walked through my home, tapping on walls and making notes on a tablet. They ignored me completely, discussing their plans for my house as if I were a piece of furniture they hadn't yet decided what to do with. "This whole wall will have to go," Beatrice declared, standing in my dining room. "And these floors are a tragedy. We'll replace them with a nice, light oak. I want to know when you plan on clearing out all this clutter," Reginald said, gesturing vaguely at my bookshelves, at the framed photos of my family, of his own son as a child. "We'd like to begin demolition as soon as possible." I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and walked out of the house, my heart pounding with a mixture of rage and a terrifying sense of powerlessness. I called my best friend Brenda. "Brenda," I said, my voice shaking. "I need to get out of here. Can I come over?" "I'll put the kettle on," she said, her voice warm and steady. I spent the afternoon at Brenda's, her quiet, sensible presence a balm to my shattered nerves. She listened to the whole sordid story, her expression growing more thunderous with every word. "That girl has lost her mind," she said, her voice a low growl. "And those in-laws of hers are nothing but high society vultures. We need to call a lawyer, Patricia. Right now." I was tired. I was beaten down. The thought of a long, ugly legal battle was more than I could bear. "I just want to go home," I whispered. "I just want to sleep in my own bed." I walked back to my house as the sun was setting, a new, fragile resolve forming in my heart. I would not be pushed out. I would fight. I walked up the familiar stone path, reached into my purse for my keys, and inserted the key into the lock of my front door. It wouldn't turn. I tried again, my hand trembling. Nothing. I looked closer. The lock was new. The old, familiar brass lock set had been replaced with a new, shiny silver one. They had changed the locks. A cold, sickening dread washed over me. I banged on the door. Danielle. Kevin. Open this door. No one answered. But I could see a light on in the living room. They were in there. They were ignoring me. I stumbled around to the back of the house, to the garage. The side door was unlocked. I pulled it open and my heart stopped. The garage was filled with boxes. My boxes. My clothes, my books, my photo albums, the entire contents of my life, had been unceremoniously dumped in dusty, hastily packed boxes and piled in the garage like so much trash. They hadn't just betrayed me. They hadn't just given away my home. They had locked me out. They had thrown me out of my own life and left my memories to gather dust in the dark. I sank to my knees on the cold concrete floor of the garage, surrounded by the wreckage of my life, and for the first time, I felt a desolation so complete, so absolute, that I thought it might actually kill me. The lockout was complete. I was homeless. I don't know how long I sat there on the cold concrete floor of my own garage, surrounded by the boxed-up pieces of my life. It could have been minutes or hours. Time had lost all meaning. All I knew was the profound, soul-crushing despair of a woman who had lost everything. It was Brenda who found me. Seeing that my lights were still off and my car was still in the driveway, she had come over, her face etched with worry. She found me sitting in the dark, shivering, my arms wrapped around a box of my late husband's books. She didn't say a word. She just helped me to my feet, her grip strong and steady, and led me across the lawn to her house, to the warmth and safety of her kitchen. She sat me down at her table and wrapped a thick, warm Afghan around my shoulders. They locked me out, Brenda. I whispered, my voice a raw, broken thing. They changed the locks and threw my things in the garage. Brenda's face, which had been soft with concern, hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She was a retired court clerk. She had spent 30 years of her life in the halls of justice. She understood the law, and she had a deep, abiding contempt for those who thought they were above it. That little, she started, her voice a low growl, then she seemed to catch herself. She took a deep, calming breath, the anger in her eyes cooling into a focused, strategic fire. Hey Patricia, you listen to me. You are not homeless. And you are not powerless. You are the victim of a crime. An illegal eviction. And we are going to handle this. Not tomorrow. Tonight. She stood up and began to pace her small, tidy kitchen, her mind clearly working, the old court clerk's instincts taking over. First things first, she said, her voice sharp and clear. Let's talk facts. The law. You added Danielle's name to the deed as a joint tenant, right? I nodded, my heart sinking with the memory of my own foolishness. Yes. For inheritance. I know, honey, I know, she said gently. But here's the thing about joint tenancy. It gives her a share of ownership. But it does not give her the right to dispose of your share without your consent. She can't just gift your half of the house to anyone. That's fraud. And it damn sure doesn't give her, or those high and mighty in-laws of hers, the right to lock you out of your own home. That's an illegal eviction. A big one. Her words, so full of a righteous legal certainty, were the first flicker of hope I had felt in days. A lawyer's letter will take weeks, she continued, thinking out loud. They'll just ignore it. We need something faster. Something more direct. We need to go there with undeniable proof of ownership and the law on our side. She stopped pacing and looked at me, her eyes gleaming with a sudden, brilliant idea. Pat, she said, her voice dropping. Where is it? Where is what? I asked, confused. The original deed, honey, she said, her voice filled with a new energy. The one from when you and Robert first bought the house. The one that was signed and notarized 40 years ago, before Danielle's name was ever on it. Do you still have it? My mind raced. The deed. It was in the old metal lockbox where Robert and I kept all our important papers. The lockbox, it was one of the first things I had packed. It was in the garage. In a box labeled financials. It's in the garage, I said, my voice barely a whisper. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Brenda's face. That, she said, her voice a triumphant purr, is the ace up your sleeve. That is the original foundational document of ownership. The new deed with Danielle's name on it is an amendment, but that old piece of paper is the bedrock. It proves your 40-year history of undisputed ownership of that property. She picked up her car keys from the counter. Come on, she said. Where are we going? We're going to your garage to get that deed, she said, her eyes shining with a fierce, protective light. And then first thing in the morning we are not going to a lawyer's office. We are going to the Atlanta Police Department. We are going to file a report. And we are going to pay your daughter and her fancy in-laws a little visit. With a police escort. The plan was so simple, so direct, so powerful it took my breath away. He was right. I didn't need to fight a long, protracted legal battle. I just needed to assert the simple, undeniable truth. I was the owner of that house. And they were trespassers. We crept across the dark lawn to my garage, two old women on a mission. We found the box labeled financials, and there it was. The original deed, its paper thick and yellowed with age, my and Robert's signatures clear and strong at the bottom. I held it in my hand and it felt like a weapon. A shield. A declaration of my own history, my own life. My ally Brenda had shown me the way. And the deed was the key. Not just to my front door but to taking back my life. The next morning I walked into the Atlanta Police Department's Zone 4 precinct, a woman transformed. The heartbroken, helpless victim of the night before was gone. In her place was the retired high school principal, a woman who had spent her career dealing with defiant teenagers and entitled parents. I was calm, organized, and armed with a righteous, unshakable fury. Brenda was by my side, a silent, supportive pillar of strength. We sat down with a desk sergeant, a large, weary-looking man with kind eyes. I laid out my evidence on his desk with a calm, methodical precision. My driver's license with my address clearly printed on it. A stack of recent property tax bills paid by me for the last 20 years. And the piece de resistance, the original notarized deed to the property at 123 Cascade Road, dated 40 years ago, bearing the names Patricia and Robert Mayfield. Officer, I began, my voice clear and steady, my name is Patricia Mayfield. I am the legal owner of the home at this address. Yesterday my daughter and her in-laws who have been staying with me, illegally changed the locks and have denied me access to my own home. My personal belongings have been removed from the house and placed in the garage. I have been illegally evicted, and I am here to request a civil standby so that I may regain access to my property. The sergeant looked at my documents, his eyes widening slightly as he took in the original deed. He looked at me, then at Brenda. He had seen a lot of messy domestic disputes, but this was different. This was clean. The evidence of ownership was overwhelming and undeniable. Ma'am, he said, his tone respectful. You are absolutely correct. This is an illegal lockout. We can certainly provide an escort to ensure you can re-enter your home peaceably. He made a call and within minutes 2 uniformed officers were assigned to us. They were young, professional, and seemed to grasp the situation immediately. The drive to my house was the longest 10 minutes of my life. My heart was pounding, but it was not with fear. It was with a powerful, surging sense of justice. We pulled up to the curb, the police cruiser following close behind. And there they were. The Harrisons' gleaming silver Mercedes was parked in my driveway. The front door of my house was wide open and I could see movers, men in uniforms, carrying furniture into my home. Their furniture. They were moving in. Danielle and the Harrisons were standing on my front lawn, directing the movers, laughing and chatting as if they were the lords of the manor. They looked up as we approached, their expressions shifting from cheerful to annoyed at the interruption. Mother, Danielle said, her voice sharp with irritation. What is this? What are you doing here with them? She gestured dismissively at the 2 police officers. I'm here to re-enter my home, Danielle, I said, my voice ringing with a new, powerful authority that made her flinch. Dr. Harrison stepped forward, his face a mask of arrogant condescension. Now see here, he began, addressing the police officers as if I were a senile old woman who had wandered off. There's been a misunderstanding. This is our house now. Our daughter-in-law gifted it to us. This woman is confused. She doesn't live here anymore. One of the officers, a tall, calm young man, turned to him. Sir, we've seen the documents. Mrs. Mayfield is the legal and original owner of this property. We are here to ensure she can access her home. That's ridiculous. Beatrice Harrison chimed in, her voice a shrill, indignant squeak. Our name is on the deed. Danielle's name is on the deed. That may be, ma'am, the officer said patiently. But that is a civil matter for the courts. What is not a civil matter is locking a legal resident out of their home. That is illegal. And we are here to remedy that. This was my moment. I stepped forward past the officers and I held up the original deed, the yellowed paper a sacred text in my hands. I held it up for them all to see. This, I said, my voice clear and strong, echoing in the sudden tense silence, is the original deed to this house. It has my name and my late husband's name on it. This is my home. It has been my home for 40 years. I looked from Danielle's shocked, pale face to the Harrisons' stunned, arrogant ones. My name is on the deed. My name is on the tax bills. My face is on the driver's license that says I live here. I took a deep breath and delivered the final, glorious blow. This is my house. And you, I said, my voice dropping to a low, powerful command, are all trespassing. The public humiliation was absolute. In front of the police, the movers, the neighbors who were now peering out of their windows, their whole entitled, greedy scheme was laid bare. They were not the new owners. They were common trespassers. The sheriff's escort hadn't just opened my door. It had kicked down the door of their lies for the whole world to see. The sight of the original deed, held in my steady hand, combined with the unshakable presence of 2 uniformed police officers, shattered their arrogant confidence. The color drained from Dr. Harrison's face. Beatrice just stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, no sound coming out. The senior police officer stepped forward, his voice calm but carrying the full weight of the law. "Sir, ma'am," he said, addressing the Harrisons, "the ownership of this property is clearly in dispute. That is a matter for a civil court to decide. However, what is not in dispute is that Mrs. Mayfield is a legal resident of this home, and you have illegally locked her out. You and your movers need to vacate the premises immediately." "Vacate?" Reginald sputtered, his voice a strangled squeak. "But our things, we're moving in." "Then I suggest you instruct your movers to move them right back out," the officer replied, his patience clearly wearing thin. "You are trespassing on this property. If you do not leave peaceably, I will be forced to arrest you." The threat of arrest, of being hauled away in handcuffs from this quiet, respectable street in Cascade Heights, was the final, humiliating blow. The public shame was more than their fragile, upper-crust egos could bear. Defeated, they began to frantically direct the movers to reverse course, to take their expensive modern furniture out of my home and load it back onto the truck. My daughter, Danielle, just stood there, frozen, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning, horrifying realization. She had made a terrible, life-altering gamble, and she had lost in the most public and spectacular way imaginable. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and a pathetic, desperate plea for me to fix the mess she had created. I just looked back at her, my expression as cold and hard as stone. I had no words for her. Not anymore. It took them an hour to clear out their belongings. I stood on my porch with Brenda by my side and watched them. It was a slow, agonizing parade of their own humiliation. When the last piece of furniture was on the truck, the Harrisons got into their silver Mercedes without a single word, not even a glance at their son or daughter-in-law, and sped away, leaving a cloud of exhaust and shame in their wake. Kevin, my son-in-law, finally seemed to find his voice. He came up to me, his face a miserable portrait of regret. "Patricia," he began, his voice cracking. "I am so sorry. I never should have let this happen." "No, Kevin," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You shouldn't have." Danielle just glared at me, her eyes burning with a venomous, impotent rage. She knew she had lost. She had overplayed her hand so badly that she had lost everything. That very afternoon I had a locksmith come and change the locks again, restoring my own security. The next morning I was in a lawyer's office. I filed a partition action, a legal proceeding to force the division of a jointly owned property. But in my case it was more than that. We argued that Danielle's name should be forcibly removed from the deed due to her fraudulent actions, her attempt to illegally dispose of my share of the property and her role in my illegal eviction. The legal battle was short and decisive. Faced with the police report and the testimony of the movers, Danielle had no defense. The judge, a stern no-nonsense woman, was appalled by the story. She not only ordered Danielle's name to be struck from the deed, effectively erasing her from the ownership of my home, but she also ordered Danielle to pay all of my legal fees. The fallout for Danielle was total. Her marriage to Kevin, already strained, crumbled completely under the weight of the humiliation and the financial ruin. He left her. And the Harrisons, having been publicly exposed as greedy, ridiculous figures, wanted nothing more to do with the daughter-in-law who had brought such shame upon their pristine family name. They cut her off completely. Danielle was left with nothing. No husband, no in-laws, no house, and a mountain of legal bills. She had tried to steal my home to impress them, and in the end she had lost everything she had been so desperate to gain. I, on the other hand, had my home back. The silence that returned to its walls was no longer the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of peace. The silence of strength. The silence of a woman who had been pushed to the brink and had found the power to push back. I had learned a painful, bitter lesson about the depths of my own daughter's insecurity and greed. But I had also learned a powerful lesson about myself. I was not a weak, helpless old woman. I was Patricia Mayfield. I was a retired principal. I was a survivor. And I was the queen of my own castle. And no one, not even my own flesh and blood, would ever take that away from me again.